It is a story about a man made of shadows and a child made of light. Kengi was a name that made powerful men tremble. He was the king of the Mapo district, a man whose heart had turned to cold stone long ago. He stood under a massive black silk umbrella, the rain drumming an aggressive, rhythmic beat against the fabric, like the war drums of his past. His suit cost more than a common man made in a year, and the tattoos snaking up his neck were a warning to the world. Do not cross him. Behind him, his bodyguards stood like granite statues, eyes scanning for threats. They were ready to break bones, but they were not prepared for what happened next. Through the gray curtain of the downpour, a tiny figure approached. It was a little girl, no older than 5. Her skin was deep and dark like rich mahogany, and her hair was braided with colorful beads that sparkled even in the gloom. She wasn't running from the monster, she was walking straight toward him. In her small, trembling hands, she carried a plastic cup filled with bright yellow lemonade. The guards moved to stop her, but Kengi raised a hand. He looked down, and for the first time in a decade, the King of Shadows felt a flicker of something he couldn't name. The girl reached out, offering the cup with a steady hand. "It's free," she whispered, her voice like a bell ringing in a graveyard. Kengi's voice was like grinding gravel when he finally spoke. "Free?" he asked, staring at the swirling lemon pulp. He hadn't spoken a kind word in years, and he certainly never received anything for free. Everything in his world had a price, usually paid in blood or betrayal. The little girl nodded, her beads clicking softly. "Mommy says when people have the gray face, they are hungry for kindness," she said. Her Korean was surprisingly fluent, flavored with a soft melodic accent that spoke of distant lands. She looked up into his cold, terrifying eyes without a hint of fear. "You have the grayest face I've ever seen. You look like you forgot how to taste the sun. So drink, it will make you smile." Kengi felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang in his chest. He looked at the lemonade, then at the girl's faded denim top. He could see her mother standing 20 paces away, a black woman in her 30s, wearing a thin jacket soaked through to the bone. Her eyes were wide with visceral terror as she realized who her daughter was talking to. She knew the black sedans. She knew the tattoos. She rushed forward, boots splashing in the puddles. "Maya, no, come here," she cried, her voice trembling with the kind of fear that only a mother knows. She grabbed the girl's hand and bowed deeply, repeatedly to Kengi. "I am so sorry, sir. She is just a child. She didn't mean to bother you. Please, please forgive us." Kengi didn't respond. He simply watched as the woman dragged the child away into the misty rain. Kengi stood frozen as the lemonade began to mix with the rainwater. His bodyguard stepped closer, his voice low. "Boss, should we clear them out? They've seen too much of your face." Kengi closed his hand around the plastic cup, his eyes fixed on the woman's retreating back. "No," he whispered, a sound so quiet the rain almost swallowed it. "Find out where she works, and find out why she looks more haunted than I do." While the world saw a mob boss, Maya had seen a crying soul. Amara, the mother, was still shaking as she clocked into her second shift at a 24-hour convenience store. She had moved to Korea with dreams of teaching, but the reality of being an immigrant and a single mother had turned into a suffocating cycle of debt. As she stocked shelves with ramen, she watched Maya coloring on a piece of cardboard in the back room. "Maya, you must never talk to men like that," Amara whispered, her hands trembling. "That man is a king of the dark. He doesn't want lemonade. He doesn't want anything from us." Maya didn't look up from her drawing of a bright yellow sun. "But he was crying, Mommy," she said softly. "Not from his eyes, but from his soul. He's very hungry." Amara sighed, rubbing her aching back. She didn't have time for soul talk. She owed 5 million won to local thugs who charged 30% interest weekly. She was drowning in a sea of red ink, and she didn't notice the black sedan parked just outside of the reach of the street lamps. Inside the car, Kongi watched the store's monitors through a hacked feed on his tablet. He watched Amara handle rude customers with a weary, polite smile. He saw her sneak a small piece of bread to her daughter when she thought no one was looking. He saw her flinch every single time the door chime rang, expecting the worst. He saw the gray face that Maya had mentioned, the exhaustion that goes deeper than sleep. Suddenly, the store door swung open with a violent crash. 3 men entered. They weren't wearing expensive silk suits like Kongi. They wore cheap tracksuits and heavy gold chains. These were the vultures, low-level bottom feeders who preyed on those too weak to fight back. "Hey, Africa," the leader shouted, slamming his hand onto the glass counter. "Where is our money? Friday was 3 days ago in my head. Pay up now or we start taking things from the shelves. Or maybe," he sneered, looking toward the back room where Maya sat, "we take that pretty little girl instead." In the car, Kongi's grip tightened on his umbrella handle until his knuckles turned white. He didn't wait for his bodyguards to open the door. He stepped out into the rain, his silhouette cutting through the darkness like a reaper's blade. The 3 thugs spun around, ready to attack whoever had interrupted their bullying. When they saw Kongi standing there alone, his umbrella dripping onto the linoleum floor, the leader didn't recognize him at first. "Piss off, old man," the thug spat. "This is vulture business. You want to get hurt?" Kongi didn't even look at the men. His eyes were fixed on Amara, who was shielding Maya behind her legs. The little girl peeked out, her eyes brightening despite the danger. "The lemonade man," she chirped. The lead thug laughed, a cruel wheezing sound. "The lemonade man? Is this your boyfriend, Africa? He looks like he's got 1 foot in the grave." Kongi finally turned his gaze to the leader. It was a look that had ended wars in the Busan shipyards, a look of predatory clarity. "You are making a lot of noise in a very quiet neighborhood," Kongi said softly. "And what are you going to do about it?" the thug challenged, pulling a small flick knife from his pocket. In one fluid motion, Kongi stepped forward. He didn't use a weapon. He grabbed the man's wrist, and with a sickening crack, the knife fell to the floor. The thug screamed, dropping to his knees. The other 2 lunged, but the door burst open as Kongi's bodyguards moved in like shadows. It was over in seconds. No shots were fired, only the sound of heavy impacts and the whimpering of broken men. "Take them to the alley," Kongi ordered. "Remind them who owns the air they breathe in Mapo." The bodyguards dragged the vultures out into the night. Silence returned to the store, save for the hum of the refrigerators. Amara stood frozen, clutching Maya. She wasn't relieved, she was terrified. She had just seen one monster devour another, and she knew that monsters always demanded a price. Kongi reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped chocolate bar. He had grabbed it from a display during the chaos. He set it carefully on the counter, then placed the empty lemonade cup next to it. "The interest is paid," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. Amara looked at the chocolate, then at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Why? Why did you help us? People like you don't do things for free. What do you want from me?" Kongi looked at Maya, who was smiling at him. "Your daughter bought a debt she couldn't afford," he said. "I'm just making sure the balance is settled." He turned to leave, but Amara called out, her voice cracking. "They'll come back. Once you're gone, they'll kill us for what you did to them. We have nowhere to go." Kongi paused at the door. He looked at the rainy street, then back at the woman who had nothing left but her child. "The vultures won't come back, but their boss, a man named Choi, is a scavenger who doesn't like losing a meal. If I leave you here, you won't make it to sunrise." He gestured toward the black sedan idling at the curb. "You aren't being kidnapped, Miss Amara. You are being relocated. Do the math. Your paycheck is 2 million, your debt is 5 million, and your life is worth 0 to them. Get in the car." Amara looked at Maya, then at the dark, powerful man. She had no choice but to trust the devil to escape the demons. The drive to the Gangnam district was silent, save for the hum of the Mercedes and the soft breathing of Maya, who had finally fallen asleep against her mother's side. Amara looked out the window, watching the neon signs of Seoul blur into streaks of electric blue and cherry red. She felt like a prisoner, even though the leather seats were softer than any bed she had ever slept on. Kangji sat in the front passenger seat, his silhouette sharp and unmoving. He didn't look back at her once, but she could feel his presence, a heavy, suffocating weight. The car pulled into the underground garage of a high-rise complex that looked like a fortress of glass and steel. Kangji stepped out and his bodyguard, Minho, opened Amara's door. They were led to a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. It was cold, minimalist, and smelled of expensive sandalwood. "Sleep," Kangji commanded, gesturing to a guest suite larger than Amara's entire apartment. "There is food in the kitchen and clothes in the closet. My men are at the door. You are safe." Amara stepped toward him, her courage returning in the face of her uncertainty. "Safe from who? Safe from the world or safe from you?" Kangji stepped into her space. Up close, she could see the faint scars on his knuckles and the deep exhaustion in his eyes that Maya had noticed. He reached into his pocket and handed her the chocolate bar again. "Safe from everyone," he said, "including yourself. Eat. You look like you're fading away." The next morning, the sun hit the Seoul skyline like a sheet of hammered gold. Amara woke up to the smell of jupe, Korean rice porridge, and fresh coffee. She found Maya already at the massive dining table, laughing as she tried to teach the stone-faced bodyguard, Minho, how to play a hand-clapping game. Kangji was at the head of the table, reading a physical newspaper, looking more like a CEO than a mobster. He looked up as Amara entered the room. "Sit," he said. "We need to talk about your future." Amara remained standing, her defensive walls back up. "My future involves going back to work," she said. "I appreciate the protection, but I don't belong here. People like you and people like me, we don't occupy the same universe." Kangji folded his paper slowly. "You're right," he said. "In my universe, people take what they want. In yours, people give until they have nothing left. Your daughter gave me lemonade 2 days ago. Do you know what I was doing when she walked up to me?" Amara stayed silent. "I was standing in the rain, waiting for a signal to authorize a hit on arrival," Kangji confessed, his voice devoid of emotion. "I was ready to end a life. Then a small girl told me I looked sad and offered me a drink for free. She broke my focus. She saved a man's life without ever knowing it." Amara felt a chill. She looked at Maya, who was blissfully unaware of the darkness surrounding them. "I looked into your debt," Kangji continued, sliding a folder across the table. "You've been paying interest on a loan your late husband took out," Kangji explained. "A loan that was illegal from the start. You've paid back the principal 3 times over. The vultures were just using you as a recurring ATM." He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the room. "Today, I am going to end that contract, but I need you to understand something, Amara. Once I interfere, you are linked to me. The police won't help you, and my enemies will know your name. Is your freedom worth the risk of my company?" Kangji didn't look worried. He looked bored, as if he were discussing the weather. He adjusted his cufflinks and turned to leave. "Stay in this room. Do not open the door for anyone but me or Minho." He descended to the building's private lounge, where Choi, a greasy man in a loud suit, and a sharp-looking man in a legal robe were waiting. Choi sneered, leaning back on a white leather sofa. "Kangji, you've crossed the line. You touched my men, you took my property, that woman owes me money, and now you're interfering with civilians. This isn't how we do business." The prosecutor stepped forward, his voice oily and arrogant. "Mr. Kangji, we have reports of kidnapping and assault. If the woman isn't released to Mr. Choi immediately, I will have a warrant for this entire building within an hour. Is a foreign laborer worth your empire?" Kangji walked to the bar and poured a glass of whiskey. He didn't offer them any. "The woman isn't a laborer," Kangji said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "She is an employee of my charitable foundation. Her daughter is a ward under my protection." Choi laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Charity? You? You're a shark, Kangji, just like me." Kangji turned, his eyes flashing with a sudden, predatory heat that made the prosecutor take a step back. "No, Choi. I am a whale. You are a parasite. You thrive on the weak. I thrive on the strong. There is a difference." He pulled out a tablet and laid it on the table. It showed a series of bank transfers, illegal kickbacks from Choi's gambling dens to the prosecutor's private offshore account. The prosecutor's face went from smug to ghostly pale in a heartbeat. "Here is the deal," Kengi said. "You will sign a document stating that Amara's debt is settled in full. You will never speak her name. You will never enter the Mapo district again. In exchange, I don't send this file to the Blue House." Choi looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor looked at the floor, his hands shaking. With a trembling hand, Choi signed the papers. "You're making a mistake, Kengi," Choi hissed as he stood to leave. "You're getting soft for a woman who doesn't even speak your language. It'll be your head on the block next." Kengi ignored him. As they left, he stood alone in the lounge. He looked at the empty lemonade cup which he had placed on his desk. He had won the battle, but he knew Choi was right about one thing. He was changing. The air in the shipping yard felt like it had been sucked out of a vacuum. Choi hadn't gone away quietly. He had waited for his moment. He had kidnapped Amara while she was walking Maya to a nearby park. Now, the metallic patter of rain hit the rusted iron containers as Kengi stood alone in the center of the yard. Choi's finger whitened on the trigger of a pistol aimed at Amara's head. He was a man who had built an empire on bullying the weak, but standing inches away from Kengi, he realized he had made a fatal miscalculation. Kengi wasn't looking at him like a businessman. He was looking at Choi like he was already a dead man. "I said stay back!" Choi screamed, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic pitch. Amara looked up at Kengi. She saw the barrel of the gun pressed into her own temple, but more importantly, she saw the look in Kengi's eyes. There was no fear for his own life. There was only a terrifying, focused clarity. In that moment, she realized he wasn't just protecting them because of a debt or a whim. He was protecting them because they were the only light left in his gray world. "You're shaking, Choi," Kengi said, his voice as calm as a frozen lake. "A man who shakes shouldn't hold a weapon. It leads to mistakes, and I am not a man who forgives mistakes." Kengi took another step forward, closing the distance. The muzzle of the gun was now pressed directly against the center of Kengi's own forehead. He had moved the danger away from Amara and onto himself. "You think you're a martyr?" Choi hissed, sweat beads rolling down his face despite the cold rain. "You think this makes you a hero? You're a killer, Kengi. You've got more blood on your hands than I'll ever have." Kengi didn't blink. "I know exactly what I am. I have earned my place in the dark. But these two, they belong to the sun, and you are standing in their way." In a blur of motion that the human eye could barely track, Kengi moved. He didn't go for the gun first. He shoved Amara toward the safety of the gap between two containers and twisted his body. The gun went off, the roar of the discharge echoing like a cannon blast through the shipyard, but the bullet grazed nothing but the air where Kengi had been a millisecond before. Kengi's hand clamped onto Choi's wrist like a hydraulic press. There was a sickening snap, and the gun clattered to the wet concrete. Choi let out a primal howl of agony, but Kengi didn't stop. He struck with surgical precision, a palm to the chest to collapse the lungs, followed by a sweep of the leg to bring the man to the earth. Within seconds, the king of the vultures was pinned to the ground, gasping for air, his face pressed into a puddle of oily rainwater. Kengi stood over him, his boot heavy on Choi's neck. He looked down at the man with a gaze that was colder than the Incheon Sea. "Min-ho," Kengi called out into the darkness. From the shadows, Kengi's loyal bodyguards appeared, their own weapons drawn and ready. They had surrounded the perimeter, cutting off any escape for Choi's remaining men. "Take 'em," Kengi ordered, his voice devoid of the rage he had shown moments ago. "Hand him over to the authorities, but not our usual contacts. Send the evidence of his human trafficking and extortion to the National Intelligence Service. I want him erased, not just from the streets, but from the books." As the guards dragged a sobbing Choi away, the tension began to drain from the yard. Kengi stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving, his expensive suit ruined by grease, rain, and blood. He looked down at his hands, the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime taking. He felt a small, warm pressure against his leg. He looked down to see Maya. She had escaped the grasp of another thug during the chaos and had been watching from behind a crate. She didn't look at him with horror. She didn't see the violence he had just unleashed. She walked up to him and wrapped her small arms around his knee. "You came," she whispered. "The lemonade man came to save us." Amara approached slowly, her legs still trembling from the ordeal. She looked at Kangi, then at her daughter, then back at the man who had just risked his life to play a shield. The wall she had built around her heart, designed to protect her from a world that had always been unkind, started to crumble. "You're hurt," Amara said, pointing to a crimson streak on Kangi's temple where the gun's slide had kicked back. "It's nothing," Kangi said, though his voice was softer now, the gravelly edge smoothed by the rain. "It is not nothing," Amara insisted. She reached out, her hand hovering near his face before she finally made contact. Her skin was warm against his cold, scarred flesh. "Why did you do it? You could have let us go. You could have stayed in your tower and let the world turn." Kangi looked at her, and for the first time in the entire story, a genuine, albeit small, smile touched his lips. It transformed his face from a mask of war into something human. "I told you, your daughter bought a debt, but I realized tonight I'm the one who owes her. She gave me back my soul for a cup of lemonade. That is a bargain I can never truly repay." Amara let out a breath she felt she had been holding for years. She didn't pull her hand away. In the middle of a dirty, rain-slicked shipyard, surrounded by the remnants of a life of crime, something new was beginning to grow. But as they walked toward the car, a new shadow emerged. A black sedan with government plates sat idling at the exit. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out, the district prosecutor from the previous day. He wasn't smiling anymore. He had a file in his hand and a team of armed police behind him. "Mr. Kangi," the prosecutor said, his voice echoing with a dangerous authority, "the law doesn't like being humiliated." The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers reflected in the oily puddles of the shipyard, creating a mosaic of neon chaos. The prosecutor stood with his chin tilted high, a man who felt he had finally reclaimed the upper hand. To him, Amara and Maya were nothing more than pawns, minor characters in a grand game of power. "Handcuff them," the prosecutor commanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and triumph. Kangi's hand remained frozen near the small of his back. His muscles were coiled, his eyes scanning the 6 armed officers. He knew he could take down the first 3 before they even cleared their holsters. But he looked at Maya. She was watching him, her big eyes reflecting the strobe-like lights. If he fought now, the last thing she would remember of him was a monster bathed in blood. "Wait," Kangi said. The word wasn't a shout. It was a vibration that seemed to settle the air. He slowly raised his hands, palms out, showing he was unarmed. But he wasn't surrendering. He reached into his inner breast pocket, not for a weapon, but for a burner phone. He pressed a single button and held it out so the speaker was loud. "Listen," he commanded. A voice began to play. The prosecutor's own voice, recorded only 20 minutes prior, talking to one of Choi's associates. "Once Kangi is neutralized, I want my cut of the Incheon docks, and make sure the woman is deported before she can testify. I don't want any loose ends." The recording was crystal clear. The prosecutor's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. That's a fabrication. It's inadmissible in any court," he stammered. "Maybe in your courtroom," Kangi said, stepping forward even as the police officers hesitated, sensing the sudden shift in power. "But I didn't send this to a judge. I just uploaded it to the Blue House's public ethics portal and sent a copy to every major news outlet in Seoul. In about 30 seconds, your phone is going to start ringing, and it won't be your friend's. It will be your replacement." As if on cue, the prosecutor's phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. He stared at it as if it were a live grenade. The officers looked at each other, then at their superior. They weren't fools. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one. "Drop the charges," Kengi said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Walk away, and I might forget to release the second half of that recording, the part where you discussed the bribes from the Busan construction project." The prosecutor looked at Kengi, then at Amara, his eyes filled with a desperate, impotent rage. He turned on his heel and barked at his men. "False alarm, we're leaving now." The sirens faded into the distance, leaving the shipyard in a sudden, heavy silence. The threat was gone, the vultures were broken, and the law had been forced to blink. 6 months later, the Itaewon district was bustling with its usual Saturday afternoon energy. The smell of roasted coffee and spicy street food filled the air. In a small, brightly lit corner unit that used to be a dusty warehouse, a new sign hung, Maya's Garden International Community Center. Inside, the walls were covered in children's drawings. Amara stood behind a desk, looking elegant and at peace. She was no longer wearing the thin, soaked jacket of a fugitive. She was the director of a foundation dedicated to helping immigrant families navigate the complexities of life in Korea legally, safely, and with dignity. The door chimed. Maya, now wearing a brand new denim dress with even more colorful beads in her hair, let out a squeal of delight. "He's here! He's here!" Kengi walked in. He looked different. The slicked back hair was gone, replaced by a softer, more natural style. He wore a simple, dark sweater instead of a structured suit. The neck tattoo was still there, a reminder of where he came from, but the gray face was a memory of the past. "You're late," Amara said, a playful smile on her lips. She walked over to him, and there was no hesitation in her movement. They had spent the last half year building something far more difficult than an empire. They had built trust. The board meeting had run long, Kengi explained, his voice warm. He had officially stepped down from his traditional businesses, handing the reins to Minho to transition the organization into a legitimate logistics firm. He was now the primary benefactor of the censor. "Is she ready?" Kengi asked, looking at Maya. "I've been ready since breakfast," Maya shouted, grabbing her backpack. They walked out together into the warm Seoul sun. As they passed a small street vendor selling traditional Korean snacks, Kengi stopped. He reached into his wallet and pulled out 3 crumpled dollar bills that he had kept with him every single day. He looked at them, then at Amara. "I think it's time to finally spend this," he said. He handed the money to the vendor and bought a large bag of honey-coated walnuts. He handed the bag to Maya, who took a big bite and grinned. "See," Maya said, her mouth half full, "I told you, snacks make the gray go away." Kengi looked at Amara. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. For the first time in 40 years, he didn't feel the need to look over his shoulder. He didn't feel the weight of a crown or the shadow of a gun. He felt the warmth of a hand that had chosen to hold his despite knowing exactly who he was. They walked down the street, a former mob boss, a resilient mother, and a little girl with a bag of snacks. To the world, they were an unlikely trio, but to each other, they were the answer to a prayer they hadn't known they were whispering. Kengi realized that life wasn't about the power you wielded over others, but the power you had to change yourself for the people you loved. The lemonade hadn't just been a drink, it had bought a second chance. And as the sun set over Seoul, casting a golden glow over the city, the gray face was gone forever. But how did a man like Kanye truly leave the shadows? It was not easy. The first few months were a trial by fire. Old associates came to him, tempting him with easy money and power. "The throne is empty, Kanye," they would say. "You only need to reach out and take it." But Kanye would look at the $3 bills on his desk and remember the tiny voice in the rain. He realized that true power wasn't making people afraid, it was making them feel safe. He began to use his vast resources to buy up the debts of other struggling families in the Mapo district. He didn't just pay them off, he taught them how to stand on their own. He turned his former soldiers into construction workers and logistics experts. He was building a new kind of empire, one that wasn't hidden in the shadows. Amara watched him change, and as he grew softer, she found herself growing stronger. She learned the language, she learned the law, and she became a fierce advocate for her community. She wasn't just a survivor anymore, she was a leader. One evening, as they sat in the center after the children had gone home, Amara turned to Kanye. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The power? The fear?" Kanye looked at Maya's drawing of a yellow sun on the wall. "I miss nothing," he said. "For the first time in my life, I can breathe the air without tasting blood. I have a family. That is more than any king ever had." However, the world of the vultures was not entirely gone. There were still those who remembered the old Kanye and hated the man he had become. One night, a fire was set at the back of the community center. Kanye was the first to see the smoke. He didn't call his old bodyguards. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and ran into the heat. He fought the flames alongside the neighbors he had once ignored. When the fire was out, a young man was found lurking in the shadows, a gasoline can in his hand. He was one of Choi's former runners, a boy who had been left behind. The neighbors wanted to beat him, to make him pay. Kanye stepped between them. He didn't raise his fist. He looked at the boy and saw himself 40 years ago. "Why?" Kanye asked. "Because you left us," the boy screamed. "You made us weak." Kanye reached into his pocket and pulled out a chocolate bar. He handed it to the boy. "You're not weak because you don't have a boss," Kanye said. "You're weak because you're hungry for something you can't name. Come to the center tomorrow. We'll find you a job that doesn't involve a match." The boy stared at the chocolate, then at the man who was supposed to be a monster. He dropped the gasoline can and wept. That was the moment the neighborhood truly changed. They saw that Kanye's strength wasn't in his hands, but in his heart. As the center grew, so did the bond between Amara and Kanye. It was a slow, quiet romance built on shared coffee and late-night conversations about the future. Maya was the bridge between them, always dragging Kanye to the park or making him help with her homework. She called him uncle at first, but one day she slipped and called him Appa. The word hung in the air, heavy and sweet. Kanye froze, his heart skipping a beat. He looked at Amara, expecting her to correct the child, but Amara only smiled, her eyes filled with the soft, glowing light. "It's okay. He is." From that day on, Kanye wasn't just the benefactor, he was the father. He took Maya to school every morning, his eyes scanning the perimeter not for enemies, but for puddles she might splash in. He attended every parent-teacher conference, sitting in the small chairs with a serious expression that made the teachers nervous until he laughed. He was learning that the greatest battles weren't fought with knives or guns, but with patience and love. He was no longer a man of shadows. He was a man of the sun. And the gray face? It was gone, replaced by the lines of laughter and the glow of a man who finally knew what he was worth. The anniversary of the lemonade incident arrived. It was a beautiful, clear day in Seoul. Kengi, Amara, and Maya went back to the street corner where it had all started. The rain was gone, replaced by the warmth of a spring afternoon. They stood on the spot where the black umbrella had once been. Kengi looked at the luxury shops and the bustling crowds. He remembered the coldness that had once lived in his bones. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the $3 bills, now framed in a small, elegant glass case. He handed it to Maya. "This is yours," he said. "It's the most valuable thing I ever owned." Maya looked at the crumpled bills. "It's just $3, Appa." Kengi shook his head. "No, Maya, it's a soul. You bought mine with this, and I'm giving it back to you so you can remember that kindness is the only currency that matters." Amara put her arm around Kengi, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You've changed this city, Kengi, not with your money, but with your choices." Kengi looked at the people passing by. He saw a young immigrant woman carrying a heavy bag, and he saw a businessman stop to help her. He saw a child share a snack with a friend. He realized that the gray face wasn't just his. It was a sickness of the city that was slowly being healed. But a story like this never truly ends. There will always be vultures in the world, and there will always be those who are hungry for kindness. Kengi and Amara knew this. They spent their lives making sure the center stayed open, a lighthouse for anyone lost in the storm. They grew old together, their hair turning silver like the rain they had once stood in. Maya grew up to be a teacher, just like her mother had dreamed of being. She taught her students that no one is too far gone to be saved, and that a single cup of lemonade can change the world. She kept the framed $3 bills on her desk, a reminder of the man who had traded a crown for a snack. Kangi eventually passed away on a quiet autumn evening, holding Amara's hand. His last words weren't about his empire or his battles. He looked at the window and whispered, "The sun, it tastes like lemons." He died with a smile on his face. The grayest face finally turned to gold. The entire Mapo district came to his funeral. There were no black sedans or armed guards. There were only families, teachers, and children, each carrying a bright yellow lemon. After Kangi was gone, Amara continued the work. She was the grandmother of the district, a woman whose wisdom was sought by everyone from the mayor to the street vendors. She would sit on the bench outside the center, watching the new generation of children play. Whenever she saw a child look sad or a stranger look lost, she would reach into her bag and pull out a chocolate bar. "Here," she would say, "go get a snack. You look like you have the gray face." She knew that Kangi's spirit was in every act of kindness, every shared meal, and every protected child. She felt him in the warmth of the sun and the rhythm of the rain. She knew that they had won the only war that mattered. They had turned the dark into light. The legend of the Lemonade Man lived on, a viral folktale told across Korea and beyond. It was a story of hope for the hopeless and a warning to the cruel. It taught people that the most powerful man in the room isn't the one with the gun, but the one with the heart to listen to a child. And so, family, we come to the end of our tale. Remember the $3 and the lemonade. Remember that no matter how gray your face might feel, there is always a snack for the soul waiting for you. All you have to do is be brave enough to reach out. Amara and Maya lived long, full lives, surrounded by the love of the community Kangi had helped them build. They never forgot the man under the black umbrella, and they never forgot the lesson he learned, that power is fleeting, but kindness is eternal. The center still stands in the Itaewon district, its sign a bit weathered, but its lights always bright. Inside, there is always a cup of lemonade waiting for anyone who needs to taste the sun. And if you look closely at the wall, among the children's drawings, you will see a small framed picture of 3 crumpled dollar bills. It is a reminder that the greatest stories don't start with once upon a time, but with a simple act of love. Hit the subscribe button to subscribe if you love this story, and also comment where you're watching from. Let the light of the Lemonade Man shine in your heart today.